Good evening, and welcome to episode 15 of Down on the Corner, the flagship show of KINER'S. I'm your host, Mark Rosenman. Tonight, John Coppinger is my co-host. We are joined by a Major League broadcaster who shares his unfiltered thoughts on the world of sports each and every week, where he has conversations with some of the biggest names from across the sports landscape. He's also a diehard Mets fan and hosted Next Stop Shea on Mets.com. It is always a pleasure to talk baseball with the host of the Believe Podcast Network's Unfiltered with Casey Stern. Casey Stern himself. Welcome, Casey. How you doing?
I'm doing better now. That's the first Next Stop Shea drop that I've heard in I don't know how long. I hosted that. Anybody who went to the stadium in the year 2007 saw that during batting practice on the big screen at Shea before every. It's one of my son's middle name is Shea. It's one of my even though I did TNT and several things after that, it's one of my favorite things I've ever done because I just remember standing there being like, I'm on the big board at Shea Stadium, and that was it for me growing up a Met fan. So it's always good to be with you guys, and thank you for the name drop. Appreciate it.
Could you imagine it now on the big board at Citi Field? Wow. That thing is huge.
Yeah, it would be crazy.
All right. So for those of you that are new to our Zoom Room show, just a quick reminder, John and I are going to start off the show by asking Casey a few questions. We ask that keep yourself muted. While we do that, we'll turn it over to you. We ask you to, if you want to ask a question, you can use the raise hand function, or you can just do it old school and just raise your hand. I'll see you and we'll get to you. And as always, and we don't even have to say this, we just ask that you keep it respectful, but we say it anyway. So first off, love following you on Twitter. Just like I always find the dedications in books as a window into the author, I love the bio on Twitter, and yours is absolutely outstanding. Dad of three heroes, free agent dreamer, host Unfiltered podcast, believer in the truth, kindness, and karma, loyalty over everything. There's really a lot to unpack there, Casey. So for those who don't know Casey Stern, break that down a little bit for us.
Yeah, I mean, everything to me is about being a dad. So, my family went through some fairly well documented things that I dealt with over the last number of years, and being, a father of three kids who are young, and you learn resilience from things that they go through. So for me, it kind of put everything in life into perspective. And I'm a big believer in, we're in a world of fake. A lot of people pretend to be sincere, but they're not. And, you forget just the sports world. I think we all see that in our own lives. So for me, anytime I meet people who are sincere, real people, I'm a big believer in that. I think heart on the sleeve is the way to go. I'd be really bad in a clubhouse in terms of interviews and trying to use the Derek Jeter handbook, because I think you'd always know where I stood. It's kind of just where I'm at in terms of headspace. But for me, it certainly comes after, Father's Day. I think it's easy to put life into perspective. Got to see Elemental with my kids this afternoon, and the rest is gravy after that. I mean, honestly, and look, and in covering the sport over the last 20 years, I've seen really in different sports. You covering Lorenzo Cain after he became a dad with Kansas City. I was covering when Fred VanVleet had a baby, and then I remember asking him during the NBA Finals when I was covering it for Turner if he ever was going to miss a shot after being a father. We see this even with athletes, where Jeff McNeil, right, and others recently last couple of years, where life kind of comes into perspective. So for me, it's always about being a dad first.
Yeah, you gotta love the fact the day after Francisco Lindor has his second child, he hits that home run, rushes back. It wasn't so great. He got hit by a pitch in that first game, but yeah, I agree with you. The last part of your bio could also apply to Buck Showalter: loyalty over everything. And once again, for those of you that are new to this show, I preface this that Buck Showalter, Billy Epler both have more baseball knowledge in one of their eyelashes than all of the Met, followers on Twitter, all the Met group people on Twitter combined. The thing is that let's start with Daniel Vogelbach. The Mets were already a man short, okay, because of the Drew Smith sticky stuff suspension. But they make an organizational decision to give Daniel Vogelbach a week's mental break. They don't send him down. They don't IL him. He's there, but they're not going to use him. What do you think it is that Buck and Billy see in Vogelbach that he continues to find his way back in the lineup, despite being a one-dimensional player who can't play the field, has no speed? What is it about his game or about the Mets that have him continually seemingly get more rope than a guy like Eduardo Escobar, say?
Well, yeah, I think part of it is what they didn't do this past offseason. And when, look, a lot of it's about being left-handed, and I know Correa is not, but when that fell through, that was that extra bat that was going to lift this lineup. And there are other issues. Look, McNeil has not been McNeil. Marte, Lindor, certainly we all understand that, right? So, it's not like he's the only guy, but it made Daniel Vogelback more important than he should have been. It's the same reason, go back to last year, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but this is just the reality. It's why they gave Darren Ruff, who was a better eighth inning guy after he came over than a hitter, 1,000,001 chances, because they felt like we need that right-handed power bat in this lineup that we're missing. And we've got to, almost like a three-point shooter who's missing all the time, let him continue to shoot. It's that for New Yorkers, John Starks 2 for 17, and we're not going to put Rolando Blackman in the game in game 6, right? That they're going to let him continue to go. So they wanted to continue to give Vogelback ABs. I think they felt stuck. Now, who is the they? Is Buck being, handled more along the lines with Billy Epler and all the suits in terms of putting the lineup together? Perhaps, certainly that's part of it. Should he be, more concerned about who gets hits than about lefties versus righties? Is he a little old school in that? That's the irony, because as much as people are saying he's accepting and adhering to analytics, Buck is way too tied to lefty, lefty, righty, righty, like we're sitting here in 1997, and we're just not living in that world. I would have rather seen Alvarez playing at DH when he's not catching and have him in the lineup. I don't care if he's a right-handed hitter or not. But I do think they're more tied to mistakes from the offseason and the necessity in their own mind for that left-handed power bat to be a factor, and Vogelback being what they saw as the only option to do it.
Interesting. So speaking of sticky stuff, and I have to give one of the followers of the Facebook page, Joe Vita, credit on this. He posted something on the Facebook group that really got me thinking about the sticky stuff. And what he had said was, these umpires, handle, a catcher will hand the ball back to an umpire to throw out of the game. An umpire checks the pitcher after every inning. An umpire also sweats just like an athlete does during the game. So he says, how do we know how much substance is on an umpire's hand when he's subjectively checking an umpire? So it got me to thinking, and unfortunately that's what I do. I'll just stare at the ceiling while I'm trying to go to sleep, and just stupid crap comes in my head. One of the stupid things that came in my head is, do you know when we all go through TSA and they check your bag, but they also swipe it with some sort of cloth that then they put into a computer that can tell them whatever particles they're searching for? Major League Baseball has millions of dollars. You can't tell me that there's not technology out there that they could put an athlete's hand on some sort of reader after every inning and tell you what percentage is. Because right now it's purely subjective to the amount of stickiness based on an umpire. And we're losing pitchers at 10 games a clip because of this.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I think part of the problem is that regardless of what you put into place, and I don't know if there's that technology, certainly they got enough money to do it, but they also, Mark, have enough money to go ahead and put IFBs in the ears of the umpires so we can get video replay to go half the time and literally can have the answers on a crack of a whip much quicker than they do. I don't need to go look under any headset or any of that nonsense. So let's be fair. But we're a couple of things. One, we're looking at one crew predominantly that's doing this. Two, Major League Baseball likes this crap. They like it to be subjective. They like the conversation and the argument. I remember somebody telling me there years ago, people remember that we were very close to an all-star game where Omar Infante, who was then on the Royals, was going to start at second base. And every Royals fan on earth had voted for him. And I had people behind the scenes in Major League Baseball, they loved it. They loved the conversation. They didn't care. Anything is good things if people are talking about Major League Baseball. They don't think the way we do about this being a black eye on it. But to me, you can't make this subjective. And every pitcher, I say this all the time because fans don't want to hear it, but every pitcher I've ever talked to has said they use something, and they always use something. You had people using the spider tack. You had people using bug spray. You had people using all kinds of crap. But what people don't realize is hitters want something used because they don't want 98 flying at their heads without any kind of grip. They need to come to a situation and figure out what is it that is necessary for grip and where is it actually going to impact spin rate. That is something we need to figure out. Those are the numbers that I want to see. I want to know how they can tell based on what they see on a hand mark what the spin rate is going to be. Did they look at it? Was the umpire sitting there at second base and saying, hey, last inning, I really thought your slider was working better than normal? They have no idea. They literally have not a clue. That, to me, if it's not impacting the game and it's not cheating in any way, I don't care how sticky it is. That is, to me, what needs to be determined. When is it really okay, and when is it going to actually impact the game in some cheating, let's say?
Yeah, it certainly makes it seem like that there's a simple solution that they're just making complicated out there. Casey, I wanted to go back to the Mets and Billy Epler,
Yep.
and I come from being an apologist for Billy and Buck as well. But if you're Billy Epler and you're looking at the next month, and if you're looking at a team that gets 50 to 60% of its starting pitching performances be in the bad to horrible range, and there's really nothing you can do about it. If you're Epler, do you look at the trading deadline and think that this season is even worth saving, or are you punting for next year when more likely than not you're going to have a new boss as a president of baseball operations?
Yeah, with my name, except he's not leaving off the S for savings. As they used to say in the old Dial Maxis commercials. Yeah, look.
Right.
That's a joke. Only people like us who watched too much TV in Long Island about 20 years ago know. Here's the thing: the fan base in this case. These teams always say they don't listen to the fan base. They do. Steve Cohen, we know, does. We know he's all over the pulse of it. We know he's the guy who's one of us, quote unquote, right? Who's going to go fix everything and be the savior. Should they? I'll use the Angels as an analogy. I don't care that they're 4 over 500. The Angels winning a World Series is no chance. Should they trade Ohtani? You're damn well right they should. Because he's one of one, and what they would get for a rental would be the most insane thing, because people will be vying to bid for it just to bring him in to sell him for 2 months on not going to free agency. Using the same thing here, should the Mets go do anything to go buy necessarily? No. Are they good enough right now? No. The only way they're going to be good enough are if players who are already on the roster become good enough. If Lindor, and when Alonso comes back, McNeil, Marte, that group they have is good enough. If the bullpen that they have, the bullpen's the one thing you could improve for sure. And those things are easier in rentals. So I do think they can add a bullpen arm or two. You're not going to punt, right? I don't think they're selling clearly. But if Verlander and Scherzer and Senga aren't better, it doesn't matter if you and I pitch in the 4th or 5th spot. Nothing against Carrasco's last 2 outings, not good, right? We love Cookie. It's not cutting it. McGill, good last time, bad the times. We have no idea what we're getting. And look, remember, we began the season with David Peterson flying off the reservation and disappearing, right? So they've had tons of issues. If those 3 guys at the front end and those 4 or 5 guys in the lineup that are supposed to be your stalwarts are not good enough, it doesn't matter who the hell you had at the deadline. So I don't think they'll sell. I think they're going to get a bullpen arm or 2, because I think that's where you can fix it without giving up much. You're giving guys in the system that nobody's going to even remember. And I think that's probably all they'll do. And they're going to be in a situation where if they're better and if they make a wild card, which is still feasible, 5, 6, whatever it is out, it's going to be because of the guys already on the roster, not guys that they add. And I know fans don't want to hear that, but I don't see it. I just don't. Who are they going to get? Like, who's coming in? They already paid Max $130 million. They paid Verlander all that money. These 2 guys got tons of Cy Youngs. Senga, everybody couldn't wait to see. If they're not good enough, who the hell are they getting at the deadline that's going to fix it? You could add a bat in the lineup for sure. But I think, again, lastly, to the fans' kind of disappointment, it's going to be another puzzle piece. It's going to be a left-handed bat who sort of got popped, this year's version of what Vogelbach was a year ago, this year version of what they tried with Ruff a year ago. I don't think you're getting big names. I think you're getting bullpen arms, and I think they'll stay pretty much as is outside of that.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that, and I'll add another layer to it. A lot of people, which I can't stand it anymore, social media, fire Billy and has a list of 5 different replacements. And I just answered, okay. And I think his first replacement was Carlos Beltran. I said, okay, Carlos Beltran is your pick. What's he doing
to be the GM?
Yeah, that's what. So I said, and who is he trading? The Mets farm system, Billy takes over a farm system that was really devoid of, second level. We all know about the kids, but they're our future. You're not going to trade any of those kids right now, for sure. So what is he going to do? I think that maybe that, and it's not entirely punting. I would love to see them to start incorporating these kids more. And when I mean incorporating more, when you bring up Vientos, play Vientos. Don't let them sit 3 days in a row and then play a fourth game, then sit in 2 more days. Bring up Mauricio, let him play second base, put McNeil in the outfield. If you can, listen, I think they might have caught lightning in a bottle with Tommy Pham. I don't know if Tommy Pham's going to keep this up. Maybe you can sell a Tommy Pham for some middle bullpen relief, but we'll get into that. So I talk a lot about this on the show, and I think for a lot of us, and I call this the Netflix effect. I think Netflix has killed baseball for some of us because we are such a binge society that if we like a show, we start watching it and we fast forward, we keep watching and we binge it, and you get to the end of a 10 part series in 2 days. You can't do that with baseball. There are so many twists and turns in a season, and each season is different. One season could be the equivalent of the West Wing. Another season could be Happy Days with Fonzie jumping over sharks. It's just what it is. And for those of us who love that excruciating journey, I think there's a lot of people now that just, they turn off sometimes in the second inning thinking, all right, this game's over at 3-0. How much do you think the way we consume baseball has changed over the last 5 years?
Well, I think it's changed for sure. It's one of the reasons why the pitch clock was instituted, and why, even though Rob Manfred not high on my list right now after everything with the A's, to me, when you look at what happened with the pitch clock, it has worked because we're trying to get a younger generation involved. So I think it's like anything else. I mean, everybody, look, yeah, they're consuming in terms of a binge matter, but at the same time, a lot of that, what have you done for me lately? And right now I've got to receive and be injected with, immediate success and immediate, those heartstrings got to get pulled in 2 minutes or I'm turning that off on YouTube kind of mentality. That's kind of where we're at. But I do believe that this has been a problem with baseball fans forever. Baseball fans have amnesia. And I think what happens is a lot of them are like I am, are football fans. They go watch football seasons after baseball, where 2 weeks into a year, teams 0-2, and we're watching a graphic. Here are the amount of teams 0-2 that have made the playoffs. It's not a lot. And they're sitting there and they're 10 games into a season saying, oh my God, it's over. Now, while the last week, just as an example, it's been terrible. You go back to just a week ago, even after all that, think about how low it was before the Guardians and the Rays week, right? With all those wins, the Mets were over. Everybody on the ledge. Buck should be fired. Everyone's terrible. Get rid of everybody. They had one good week, won 5 games in a row, and they were in the wild card spot, and they were 4.5 out of a division. 2 weeks later, the world was ending and it was over, and they're 3 or 4 out of a playoff spot. Now they're 5.5, but they're 5.5. They're not catching the Braves anybody. Anyway, I think we knew that a month ago. It seemed not as good as Atlanta. But I want to go back to something that you said before, because I think this is important, okay? This team, the idea that Billy Epler is, now look, GMs make great moves and stupid moves, and they're all determined on the reality that comes from what the perception was we thought it would be. But what I've always said to people is perception is what matters. Give you an example. Let's go all-time Mets moves. And I happen to be, Steve Phillips is a friend, so I take this off of his shoulders not the Piazza thing, not the Bonilla thing. But every time that I think about it, I take Robbie Alomar off his shoulders, because Robbie Alomar at the time was so damn good, and was, at a time when fantasy baseball was just getting started, was literally the stat stuffer extraordinaire at second base, best defensive second baseman I've ever seen. And when he came over, he caught the Met fever that we got with Kevin McReynolds and all those other kind of stuff, right? But at the same time, if you think about it, that move wasn't a bad move. It just didn't work. It just didn't work. So here's the scenario with Billy Epler. He got Verlander. Do you know anyone that didn't want Verlander?
Nope. Everyone wanted him.
Do you know anyone that wasn't, at the time, even before the DeGrom injury, happy and thoughtful and thought, hey, Billy Epler did a good job not giving DeGrom 5 years? Everyone thought he did a good job not giving DeGrom 5 years. Do you know anyone who didn't think that pulling Senga off was the right move? Do you know anyone who didn't think David Robertson and Raley and the moves to add to the bullpen that was supposed to have Diaz healthy were not the right moves? Do you know anybody who thought anything I just said was not the right thing? Everyone thought that was the right thing. Now the team's bad and everything's garbage. Everything he did was garbage. That's dumb. So I'm staring everyone in the face who says that, and I'm telling everyone, you're dumb then, because you can't say it was all. Now, look, it didn't work, and those players are the ones that now have to be accountable because they haven't lived up to the back of the baseball card or the contract or what they're supposed to do. Billy Epler did what we all would have done if you look at the perception versus reality of those names. I'm sorry. I'm not saying he's the greatest GM that's ever lived, but we all thought those were good moves at the time. You can't now go back in hindsight and say they all suck. You just can't.
Right. And you can't go, Buck and Billy are failures. They won 101 games last year, and this season's not over yet either. And guess what? Right now, the same way. Has Trey Turner lit it up? I mean, look at all these offseason moves, the big ones that we thought were all going to be great. Listen,
Correa.
Mets have Correa too. The Mets have listen, the Mets have also dodged a couple of bullets too. I mean, the fact that Correa, they walked away from, which was Trevor Bauer, DeGrom, Trevor Bauer. I mean, they've locked out on some of those as well. But listen, he got unbelievable production last year out of Marte, unbelievable out of Escobar. That final month was just what carried them to the 101 wins. Shored up the bullpen in some respects. So, yeah, I agree. I don't think it's on him. And you're right. It's the guys need to live up to the back of their baseball cards. However, and the one I think maybe valid criticism that some of the people on Twitter might have is that when you were going into this new rule change, maybe an older pitcher wasn't the guy on the pitch clock. And I don't know how much. Listen, I think Verlander is going to bounce back. I really do. I don't think you go from winning Cy Young to totally falling off the cliff and being awful. So I think he's going to rebound. And I think, listen, if they're going to salvage the second half of the season, it's going to be Scherzer and Verlander that absolutely have to turn it around and be, 1 and 1A. And listen, do I think the way this team is constituted that they can win 6 out of 4 every 10 games for the remainder of the season? Yeah, I kind of think they can. I don't think that's unrealistic. And if they do that, they're going to be an 88, 89 win team, which should get them a wild card. The Phillies last year were the same way. We talk about the Padres. Padres, same thing, all their moves. Anyone say, don't get Juan Soto, don't sign Bogarts, don't, Fernando Tatis Jr. That's an all-world team. They're not performing up to their capabilities right now either. So, listen, it's a long season, and that's what makes baseball so great. I am going to stick with the baseball analogy a little bit, and maybe that's why it's so interesting, the Met fan psyche. I think Met fans enjoy hating their team because you just look at every day, like what people post there, it's like unbelievable. But I also think, like, when you look at TV series, what do we like about TV series? We love when a character gets developed and that character has consistency, and we know what we're going to get out of, George Costanza. We know what we're going to get out of Kramer. The way baseball lineups are constructed today, Gil Hodges, even, the guy, the master of the platoon, at least you knew it was going to be Art Shamsky or Ron Swoboda. Bucks lineups are just so diverse every single game. You're not really watching the same team from game 1 to game 2 to game 3. I don't know how much that irritates the fan base, as well as I don't know. There's a different feel for me, which is strange because, we've been doing this thing similar to the ESPN Beat the Streak. We're trying to get to 31 games, which is Moises Alou's longest Met hitting streak, and everyone has to pick a guy every day when we post a lineup, and you can feel a collective shrug of the shoulders and a deep exit whenever Vogelback's in the lineup, whenever Alvarez is not in the lineup, whenever Batty's not in the lineup, when Vientos was here when he's not in the lineup. How much do you think the constant catering to, and the analytics are even further along, because I had this conversation with Buck, and Buck says it's not only the splits, it's also they look at pitchers' arm slots and curve of the ball and arc of the ball and a batter's swing against that arc of the ball to determine the best possible lineup. And to me, that boggles my mind. That is just, I can't wrap my head around that. What are your thoughts, Case?
I'm big on lineup construction. I think that this is one of the things that could be better. And I think you could say, hey, look, why is Alvarez not every day? Why is he hitting ninth? Why isn't this guy there? The bad news for Met fans, and I'll go back to something you've said before, because this is, I've said, look, I've said this forever, and I am one, right? Fans, most of them are insane. This is what failing and being this depressed for that many years does to you, right? Because just look at it this way. Here's the life of a Met fan. I go back to 2008, really 2015. To me, this is the biggest example. That team had John Mayberry Jr. and Soup Campbell on a Sunday night against the Yankees, right before the deadline. The fact that the Mets were even relevant after that is the most amazing, should be the happiest thing that's ever happened to a Met fan. And Met fans still only remember that season about Familia. It was a 6-run lead. And why was Matt Harvey in a game? And the fact that Lucas Duda can't throw a ball and defend, right? So Met fans aren't happy. Met fans were dying to put Brett Beatty in the lineup. Then Brett Beatty got in the lineup every day, and we realized he's got potential to be really good, but he's not that great yet. And we don't know if he's ever going to be that great. And he's not David Wright, right? I'm sorry. It's just not going to happen. And neither is Mark Vientos. Sorry. All right. End of the day, Alvarez to me is a much top flight prospect compared to the other two, in my opinion. Okay. Sorry. So, but Met fans then go to something else. So now it's the lineup. Let me ask you a question. Do you think Jeff McNeil would be hitting 340 if he was hitting second every day? Or that Vogelbach would have been hitting better if these guys can't hit anywhere where they're being moved around, the problem is them. And then what happens is the manager feels like he doesn't have a lineup, and the GM starts to get crunched down from the owner and Steve Cohen. So now they start, to your point, to go in the analytic handbag, and now you got all the different lineups. I will say this. Jim Leland used to have a different lineup seemingly every day. I remember when he was managing the Tigers, and they were like, why the hell is Ramon Santiago in the game? Why Brandon Inge hitting like 180, and he's in there all the time? Bobby Valentine, who had a lot of success with the Mets, had a different lineup seemingly every day. A lot of managers that are old school are kind of that way, even without the analytics, Marcus. They're trying to find, what do you always hear? Trying to find something that works. Trying to find a combination, like a rotation on the floor in the NBA that works. Do I think it could be better? Yes. Do I think Alvarez should be playing almost every day? That's the one thing for me that's a yes. And at whoever's, detriment that is, sorry. Like, that's the one thing. He's in there for me and not hitting ninth. But Joe Madden used to hit like BJ Upton fourth and then hit him ninth like the next day when the Rays were winning divisions. He hit Anthony Rizzo, if you remember when he was with the Cubs. He just randomly said he was going to start him at leadoff for a month, and no one understood why. He just decided to do it in a year that they won. All managers do this, but when the players play well, it doesn't matter. The accountability is on the guys with the bats and the guys on the mound, and that's the part Met fans do not understand. They don't get.
Totally agree.
In my opinion.
Got one more with the TV analogy. So obviously, Mets were a good team last year, right? No question about it. 101 wins. Good team this year. If on paper, if everyone performs up to their capability. Cheers was a good show with Shelley Long, right? And but it got better. It got better with Kirstie Alley, in my opinion. Can Ronnie Mauricio be Kirstie Alley? Could Ronnie Mauricio come up here? I think he has, in my opinion, I think he's got less holes. I think he's more athletic than Batty and Vientos. I think listen, I know they're trying him in the outfield. I know he hasn't been great at second base, but it just seems like the Phillies and the Braves, they bring these guys up, and they plug them in and they succeed. You take a look at some of these young guys that come up. Yeah, there are hiccups. There are holes. There are games where they're going to look out of place, but there is an energy to them. And Alvarez, for all his warts defensively that we heard, listen, he's still, and Buck says he's got to know, he's got to know when to let a ball roll foul. He's got to know when to put a ball in his pocket. These are things he's going to learn. But he's also got that raw energy that sometimes is infectious. And I think Mauricio could bring that. Do you think there's a place for Ronnie Mauricio sometime this season on a regular basis on this team?
I think you only call him up if it's a regular basis. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. I think that's one of the mistakes that the Mets have been kind of stuck in, is bringing guys up and not being sure whether or not you stick with veterans who you need to get out of funks or you go with the kids every day. To bring a kid like that, who's ultra talented up, you have to let him play every day, especially he's in a position he's learning. He's got to be out there getting reps. In the outfield, you talk to anybody who's a decent outfielder or even became one, they got to get reps. And he's going to have to be out there, I think, almost every day. Are the Mets in a position right now to put him out there almost every day? We got a lot of judges and juries that are Met fans, because many of them will say yes. The Mets will probably say no. Now, they're probably going to harken back to something I said a few minutes ago, which is we can't get to a postseason this year if the guys that we were supposed to have trusted don't figure it out. So we need them to figure it out. My first answer, though, when you said, can he be that kind of guy who can yada yada, my first question was going to be, can he pitch? Because to me, even though the offense has not been good, you look at outings like this against the Cardinals where they lose 8-7. You look at the leads that they blew where Scherzer's sitting there with a 5-1 lead against the Yankees. They had enough runs in those games, just to name 2 or 3 from the last week alone, Mark, that they could have won, right? And bullpen's part of it and all of that, but they had enough runs. At the end of the day, your starters can't all be out of there after the 4th inning. They need innings. They need guys. They need a Bartolo Colon in this staff who could just literally take lumps. That's where they miss Bassett. Now, I don't miss what he delivered at the end of the year because I think the stage got too big for him, if I'm being honest. But I think what he did during the year in the regular campaign, being really more than anyone else, the guy who would go give you 7 innings and you knew would get, that is what they miss. They need innings. They need that bullpen to not be so taxed, so we're not showing the warts. Give Buck more room and wiggle to be able to go to the guys he wants and the spots he wants. Can Mauricio fix that? No. Do I think he can give the energy? I absolutely do. But to me, the question would be, and I think it's an open question, can they play him every day? If you can't play him every day, I think it's a disservice to a kid like that to do that. I think you're better suited hoping your team gets good enough to get to a postseason and then call him up to be that injection maybe late in the year. And then you could sprinkle, because then you could sell it, Mark. Hey, look, he's here to kind of learn what it's like to see what meaningful games are like, get some at-bats. But if you're going to bring him now, you're now saying he's an everyday player, in my opinion, the rest of the way. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. Because guess what? He goes 2 for 18, right, and plays sparingly. Now you just hurt his confidence for no reason and sent them down. You either do it or you don't do it. The Mets have been caught too many times, like with Vientos, in the middle. You can't do that with Mauricio, who to me is a much higher talented guy than I think Vientos is.
Right. Can't be a little bit pregnant. You got to bring him in either one way or the other. I agree with you. Yeah, Johnny.
Yeah, no, I considering your answer to the last question, Casey, I think I know what your answer is going to be to this question. But there's been a lot of a breakdown of a lot of different areas in this team. The offense has been inconsistent, but the defense has been very inconsistent. You got guys like Luis Guillorme making errors. You've got guys making bad base running decisions, like Brandon Nimmo trying to stretch a double to a triple with the play right in front of him. You got guys not letting their pitchers know when guys are stealing home. You've got pitchers that aren't listening when they do yell at you when guys are stealing. But do you think that this is all kind of a culmination of mental wear and tear when the team goes out there and after the first inning, they're down 2-3-0 seemingly every game? Is this a cumulative effect of the starting pitching being so inconsistent and so bad in the first inning? Not just Carrasco, but pretty much everybody. 2-0, 3-0 every game. That'll wear on a team and cause breakdowns in a lot of other areas.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is where you could say when you're the manager, you have to wear some of this. And I would say that. And I think Buck certainly knows that. But to me, this is Buck. This is Lindor, Alonso, whoever you consider the leaders, Scherzer, Verlander now in the room. Because to me, they're playing tight. I don't think that's about being down 3-0. I think, now, I'll go back to Mark brought up the Padres before, right? The Padres are way too talented to, and they've been a little better lately, be 2 games under 500 as we sit here and looking up at 3 teams, including the Giants, who they're way more talented than, and the Diamondbacks, who they're more talented than. But to me, what's happening with them? Now, do I think it's Bob Melvin who I think is a very good manager? No. But I think the players are tight. I think Bogart's getting paid $280, tight. I think Tatis came out, and he's not as much now, but way tight, trying to do too much because of all the pinworm and the PEDs and everything else, right? Machado goes down. Holy crap, what the hell are we going to do without him in the lineup? Everybody else gets tighter. This isn't, and I'm bringing that up because, not to divert, but so Met fans watching and listening know this isn't just a Met thing. that this happens to. This happens to other teams that have really high expectations. This is why you admire what the Astros have done for 6 years in a row, whatever they did in 2017 or not. It's why you admire what Dave Roberts and Andrew Friedman have built in LA, because every year they've been the ones with targets on their back. It's why you admire Alex Anthopoulos. And it is hard to do that. Now, the Mets need to get there and get consistent. But to me, I think you're absolutely dead on in that they're tight. But I think it's the expectations, the pressure, everybody looking at each other instead of in the mirror, trying to figure out what's going on, not taking enough accountability. And overall, I know this sounds like it's not a baseball analysis thing, but I'll go back to your Alvarez comment. They're not having a lot of fun. And it's not a lot of fun when you lose, but they don't look like they're having any fun. They don't. You look at some other teams that are around the game that don't spend a lot of money. Go watch the Guardians play a game. They collectively make like $18. And Terry Frank and Tito is sitting there, and he's got this team's always in the dugout having a good. They are enjoying the game. The Mets look like they're miserable, even when at the beginning of the year they weren't behind the 8 ball yet. They look tight and miserable. That to me is an absolute concern, but I don't think it's because they're being put in holes early by the pitching. I think, look, that hurts. It's like in the NFL, it's like when you go 3 and out and your defense can't hold anybody. Clearly we could say all the right things, but we know that matters. We know you're feeling that brunt. When DeGrom was out there for how many years, the offense looked like what? They were tight and trying too hard. They all look like they're playing with DeGrom starting, and I think that's the expectations. It's this team has not, and that goes on Lindor, goes on the leaders, it goes on Buck for sure. That's not an Epler thing. I don't think these players have performed well with the expectations they have, and that absolutely is a problem for sure.
Do you think that they're tight? Do you think that they're tight because of the way the season ended last year also?
No, I think they're tight because all they heard about was how much money the team spent bringing in Verlander, all the things that happened, coming off the 100 wins, and all the disappointment. Yeah, I mean, that's part of it. But I think all that spring and all that time about all the Mets were going to do, and everybody got too much social media now. So it's not like, players can tell you all they want. I don't pay attention. It's a bunch of garbage. They all got Instagrams. Even if they're sitting there and they're doing it for their kids and family on Facebook, what do you think they're seeing out of the corner of their eye? Payroll figures, how much the Mets are supposed to do, what a disappointment they are, leading every MLB Network show about what the hell's going on with the Mets. And Steve Cohen's got a Twitter that I'm sure they all follow, right? All of that. I think, to me, it's in part last year, in part the expectations and the way they got out of the gates. And I think they're tight. And to me, Lindor's got to set the tone with that. And when he succeeds, we've seen this in his time here. He was not this way in Cleveland because he always succeeded. So it was really hard to find times. Like, there was no slump. I mean, this guy in the postseason was a kid, was brilliant. Yeah, represented Puerto Rico, was hitting home run. It didn't matter. Like, pressure didn't bother him. But what we have seen is he's kind of miserable when he's not doing well and they're losing, and you could see him wear that. And then he's lighting up and smiling and bringing all the energy you just talked about, and infectious when they're winning. I think he's got to be more of a tone setter than he is. And I think Marte's got to be more of a tone setter. His energy has been down because he's not playing as well. They don't look like they're having a lot of fun. I know it's not fun when you lose, chicken or the egg, but to me, that team has to figure out how to find and refine that joy just playing a baseball game. And I think if they do that, their talents will take over a little bit more naturally.
Interesting you say that, because one of the things I also noticed is last year with Scherzer and the pitching staff. And I don't know, maybe, obviously with Senga, there's a little bit of a language barrier there. And, obviously Quintana hasn't been here. But last year, Taijuan Walker, Bassett, they had it was almost like a corporate meeting, the pitchers. They were discussing pitching all the time. You don't see that at all this year. Nimmo got caught stealing once, hasn't attempted another stolen base since he got caught stealing at second base, where he was, finally bringing that to his game. I find that interesting. The one thing I will say about Lindor, and I asked him about this, because last year in spring training, he had this mantra that he needed to slow everything down. The year before, he was just trying too much, thinking too much, and couldn't slow the game down, enough for him to process everything and to succeed. He said last year he was able to do it. I asked him this last homestand, I said, Francisco, I said, you were always quoting slowing everything down. How much has, the pitch clock changed, your ability to slow things down? He says, I'm not going to lie. He said in the beginning of the season, it was a huge adjustment, and I'm finally getting comfortable with it now. So, he's a guy who works super hard, and even when he's not hitting, he's still driving in his runs. He's still hitting home runs. He's still playing the field well. He's still going to the mound and when things should be. He is still one of the leaders in this team. The interesting thing is they love this ownership so much. The last homestand, Brandon Nimmo went over to Steve Cohen's wife, gave her a big hug, and apologized for what they are putting them through. That's interesting, because you talk about social media. They care about this ownership because this ownership treats them like family and they feel like family. This is wearing on them too. The fact that they're disappointing their quote unquote mother and father. I mean, she was great. She said, listen, I've been a Met fan my whole life. I have tons of calluses. Don't worry about it. Just do what you do. And he kind of smiled and shook it off. But that is interesting also. I think you've hit upon something. I think there is a lot of different pressures all over the place. And obviously, New York is something different than any other marketplace when you play here. Ask any New York Ranger fan and how that one cup in '94, what that still means after all those years of none. I think the only other marketplace where you have that intense, vision is probably Toronto in hockey, or maybe Montreal in hockey. There's
Dallas Cowboys,
Green
Cowboys
Bay,
probably,
and Green Bay maybe. Green Bay,
yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
Dallas Cowboys for sure.
I throw the Red Sox.
Sure. Yeah,
I throw the Red Sox in there too.
Yep.
Yes.
Red Sox.
Right.
I think. Look, in Montreal Canadiens. I mean, play. But here's the thing, right? So it's not an excuse, because I can go back to, and I'm not saying you're making an excuse, but this is to be fair. All those things that we just talked about are accurate, but it's still not an excuse. You sign all that. You're getting $313 million. Let's call a spade a spade. Last year, down the stretch of the season, all the Braves series combined, right, in the end of the year, that last month, and that Padres series, I thought the player with the worst at-bats on the whole team was Lindor. The whole team. I thought it was Jeff McNeil and Brandon Nimmo were going to have great ABs and get hits. Pete Alonso was even trying too hard and flailing a bit. I think he was tired from wearing it the whole year. And Lindor was atrocious. His at-bats were horrible. He was 3 swings, flailing away at balls in the dirt. And I thought the pressure got to him. And I don't think that it made diamonds in his case last year. And I think, to me, that is what is really disconcerting about what's happened to him at the beginning of the season. Because what I want to see is a guy who recognizes that himself and spends the whole offseason saying, I'm never going to let that happen again, because I have an onus to be the best player on this team. I'm getting paid like I'm the best player on this team, not like I'm the 4th best player on this team. And to me, Lindor has had a problem since he's come over. Look, you can go back to the time with Baez from the year prior. He's had some warts. I mean, this is not, is he a winner? I think, he's won, and at times he's done that. Do I think that he has, taken the team on his back in big spots? Not enough for what he's gotten paid. And I think he probably knows that. But think about what that pressure does to you. And I think you grip the bat too tight. Sometimes it goes the wrong direction. And again, I mean, it's like, that's what makes the guys in the NBA or wherever, it doesn't matter the sport, the quarterbacks like the Mahomes, the guys who know the spotlight's on you and I got to get it done. All the pressure's on me, and they still make the shot. They still make the throw. They still get the hit. I mean, how many years Mike Trout been the only guy in his lineup that anybody cared about, even way before Ohtani, and was still doing it every day. To me, if Frankie Lindor wants to get paid like a superstar, you better start playing like one. And he's not.
All right, this is the time we turn it over to the Zoom room. You guys, if you want to use the raise hand function or you want to do it old school. All right, Steve Gruber is doing it old school, so we'll go with Steve first. Steve, go ahead. Got to unmute.
Hey, Casey, can you hear me?
What's up, buddy? I got you good, man. What's going on?
Hey, Long Island guy, live in Arizona now. We're roughly the same age. What is your most painful memory from when we were growing up? There's plenty of them. I'm just curious. I can go through a whole list of things, but just curious what you would think. And
so
by the way,
yeah.
you did a long rant on MLB radio about how bad the Mets were. I think you wrote like a poem or something. That was
years
awesome.
ago.
So very good
Thank
job.
you, man. Thank you, man. Yeah, that was years ago. Thank you. Yeah, okay, so I have a lot of choices, but I'll give you what it is, and I'll give you a funny story with it. So I had the pleasure, and he's still one of my best friends, to work with Jim Duquette for well over a decade at MLB Radio and at MLB.com.
Super
And
nice guy.
super guy. Well, the first time that and this is a true story, the first time that we worked together, and I'm trying to remember what the name of the PJ Clark's, which actually had a fire set to it. I think the building is back up and running, I think, but it's somewhere up on the west side. We went to a steak dinner, and I said to him, I said, look, we're going to be working on air together, and I need to talk to you before we do it. And he said, okay, yeah. He thought it was going to be about work. So I sat him down. I had a piece of paper with me. We had some cocktails, and I had a list of all the problems I had with his tenure. And this is a true. When you see him, this is a true story. Okay, we still have it. This is he thought it was hilarious. It's a true story. I said, I can't work with you until we get all this out of the way, right? So in that, at the front end of that was the moment that stands out for me above all else. And it was right around my birthday, my 21st birthday in 1999. So my 21st birthday was on the day that Robin Ventura had the Grand Slam single. And just a couple of days later, my most painful memory probably for me in my life, and I threw and broke a television, was Octavio Dotel is in the bullpen, ready to go. Hadn't given up hits. He had thrown a couple innings in that long game a couple of days before, but he was good to go. He was ready in the pen. And Bobby Valentine's got Kenny Rogers against Andrew Jones. And I'm watching him walk the season. We're down 7-0 against Smoltz, I think it was. Piazza hits a 3-run home run. We got 7 runs off that dude. We're tied. Holy expletive. And even with Armando Benitez and John Franco trying to ruin our lives yet again, love you, Johnny, I worked with him too. Here we go, and we've got we got a moment where everything's on the line, and I got Kenny Rogers roasters out there walking Andrew Jones. That singular moment is the most painful moment probably in my Met life. It was right about that age where I had been a suffering Met fan for long enough. I got sucked in 2 days before with one of the great moments you can ever possibly imagine. For everybody who remembers that 15 innings, I mean, all the at-bats I still remember, and my hair stands up, all of that, right? And here you are, and of all people in Met lore, it's Kenny bleeping Rogers who is sitting there walking Andrew Jones. That moment probably stands out to me as my lowest Met moment as a fan all time, for sure.
Question, can you hear me? Good.
Yep, yeah, I got
good.
you perfect. Yeah. I got you perfect.
What about the Scott Kazmir trade? I remember sitting in the car listening to FAM or WFAN, and we're going to trade for Zambrano. They were expecting Victor Zambrano, and they got Carlos Zambrano. They got Victor Zambrano for Kazmir.
Yeah,
that was another disaster.
Oh yeah, I mean, we can go on. You're trading Melvin Mora. I remember the first day Mike Bordick had a home run, I think his first game. And I think Bubba Trammell hit a home run too. I was at that game and I was like, oh my God, they're going to be great. And then that didn't work out. And Kurt Abbott was playing in the World Series. The Kazmir one, it's in revisionist history, but he ended up having, we know at the off the field, he had some issues with, getting the munchies too often and, had some problems that curbed him in a lot of other places. So, but yeah, the Victor Zambrano thing, that was pretty. Look, in terms of Met trades, to me, the one that still is the most painful as a fan was the Dykstra Juan Samuel deal. I am almost 45, so the Nolan Ryan, I'm obviously well aware of all of that, but I didn't have to live it, right? So for me, Kevin McReynolds, Kevin Mitchell, which was pretty bad. There have been some others, certainly. You mentioned the Zambrano, but to me, watching Lenny Dykstra perform the way he did with the Phillies, again, has had his own issues since, clearly. But Juan Samuel come in and that whole thing, that was probably of all the Met trades. I'm not sure what it is for you guys, but that's the one that always stands out as the one that really hurt me the most because I love Nails. I love Lenny Dykstra. And it wasn't like we watched him go fail somewhere else and Samuel was terrible. Samuel did horse and what comes the poop with it. And here's Lenny Dykstra getting the team to a World Series in Philadelphia, no less, of all places. That one hurt me big time.
Yeah. Yeah,
If-
it's interesting. I haven't really given thought, but then instantly, and great guy, has been on our show a number of times. Tommy Glavine. That was just a horrible day because I think it was also the first it was opening day of the football season, and Tommy gives up all those runs
7.
against the Marlins, 7 runs
7.
against the Marlins, and then I think the Jets got toasted by Buffalo. I think like 30. It was just a miserable Sunday. It was awful. That might have been my low point in the Met fan. Obviously, I'm much older than UK, so obviously the Ryan one is no doubt is the big worst. Well, Tom Seaver also, but I love Dougie Flynn and Steve Henderson as human beings. But when you trade the franchise, that killed as well.
That Glavine
right.
day, just quickly, that Glavine day, I will tell you, that's the quietest I've ever heard that press area, that stadium, in my years covering that team. And it's also the most crying I've ever seen in that clubhouse. That was, and I went in. There were players that had clothed themselves off in room because they were crying so hard and so terribly that they didn't even want anybody to see that they were doing so, and you could hear the weeping. I mean, that Miguel Olivo, I think, Josh Willingham and Miguel Olivo, I think, both hit homers.
Yep.
And I remember, weirdly enough, Ramon Castro, who started that game, hit or either that or he was pinch hitting. Almost hit it was like right to the wall, like a 3-run home run, and they thought they were back in the game. And
that was in the first inning. That was almost a grand slam.
I remember grand slam. I remember that. I'm like, Josh Willingham, this guy hit 6th in like every lineup he ever played, and every time he came to the Mets, it was like he became like Pat Pearl. I mean, like a lesser version. Is amazing, but yeah, that was the quietest I've probably ever heard that press area, because even the people covering I think everybody was so surprised that was happening. While I think that was the same year CC Sabathia was pitching like every 25 seconds for the Milwaukee Brewers. That was painful.
Hey Casey, that same day, that was 10 o'clock Arizona time, so 1 o'clock game. Made myself the biggest breakfast ever, champagne, all excited. Never ate anything. Took everything, dumped out the champagne, took the breakfast, threw it in the garbage, went back to bed.
Dude, the worst. That was the worst. That was bad.
That's my low point. All right, Steve. So you had your hand. Good.
Yeah. Hi. So Met memory for me, since I'm kind of sandwiched between you guys, I'm 52. Doc Gooden getting no-hitter with the Yankees. I
It's a good one.
Painful. That was, he was ours from birth, and to see him, we got a lot of the good stuff, but then the struggles that followed, and then for him to have that success elsewhere, just that killed me as a fan. I come from the same camp as Mark in terms of it's a long season and trying to really think rationally about it, unlike the message boards on Facebook. In fact, interestingly, my wife and I were on vacation. I met a kid who's going to be a starting linebacker at Tennessee next year. And he said, "Do you have any advice?" I said, "Stay off social media. Read it. Don't tweet, don't post, nothing. You tweet that you love vanilla ice cream, someone's going to say you're a racist for not liking chocolate." So that was my advice to him. But anyway, so I agree with you about, firing either Buck or Epler right now does nothing, zero. Because who's going to come in and what are they going to change? What would Epler, or I always ask people, well, what would you have done if you were GM, revisionist history, what would you have done preseason? And they kind of fumble. They say, "Well, I wouldn't have had 2 40-year-old pitchers and blah, 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 blah." But yeah, it's like what was out there and what was available. But I'm just thinking about the next couple of weeks, from here we are now, and where will we be mid-July? And I think it's up in the air, right? Of, either they're going to turn it around and we're going to have some glimmer of hope and they'll make a move or two, like you said, probably in the bullpen, or they're going to be sellers. I'm curious of your take on that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't know what they have to sell. I mean, the Mets don't really have anything to sell, so it's like they're either going to, they're not going to punt. I mean, and really punting for them is, again, there's nobody to sell really, right? So, look, people are going to say stupid stuff, but you're not trading. It's like Verlander, if he performs better, let's say the next few weeks and the Mets are trouble. Oh, a trade. You're not moving him. You're nothing you're doing. There's nobody to trade. No, you could move David Robertson if you want to move. If you wanted to sell David Robertson, you can move Ottavino. You wanted to sell an I mean, honestly, other than a couple of bullpen, what are you selling? So what I expect the Mets to do is to add a bullpen arm or two and to pretty much stand pat outside of that. Could they add maybe a fifth starter that gives you some innings that you actually could trust, that's a rental and an expiring contract? Maybe. Yeah, perhaps. But outside of that, what are they going to do? They're going to rely on Verlander, Scherzer, Alonso, Lindor, Senga, McNeil, Marte, the same way, Nimmo, they were going to rely on those guys at the beginning of the year because it's those guys who are going to fix it or those guys who are going to fail. At the end of the day, that's what you have. So I don't think if they stay, look, nobody's really out of a wild card race. At least you have to be real bad, right? So if they're even 5 out the way they are now in the end of July, they'll probably add a reliever or two because money's not a problem for Steve Cohen. So if they, let's say take an expiring contract where they got $2.5 million, left on the books for the rest of this year, and somebody's a free agent, right? That they can add a lefty and a righty. I think they could use one of each. Yeah, I think you maybe give Buck a little bit of a deeper bullpen to work with that takes a little pressure off the starters. But if you don't get it from the top 3 guys in that rotation and the 3 or 4 guys in your lineup you trust, it doesn't matter if you play Beatty, Alvarez, Vientos, you, me, Mark, and John. It's not going to matter. Those guys are going to be the ones who do it or don't do it. Not any of us, not Buck, and not Billy Epler.
So when you say
May I
add
ask
a
one question?
bullpen arm, one second though, if you're looking for a bullpen arm, is Aroldis Chapman maybe that guy? And do they have enough to get a Chapman? Because Chapman's going to be a guy that listen, I don't want him just because of all the baggage he comes with.
I don't know.
I mean,
what they're doing.
Yeah. Zach Britton was a guy that I don't know what happened with Zach Britton. Like people looked at him, obviously he must have nothing left. I mean, the fact that we have Dylan Bundy getting lit up in the minors and no one signs Zach Britton surprises me. Rawlings
mentions Alexis Diaz, but he's going to be too expensive a trade target. You're not going to trade the prospects that the Reds are going to want for Alexis Diaz.
Right.
No, you're adding veteran relievers that are expiring guys whose names aren't going to drive anybody anywhere except to be like, who the hell is this? Like the bullpen are versions of Darren Ruff and Daniel Vogelbach. I mean, that's what you're doing. And maybe add a bat and
Dominic Leone, baby. Dominic Leone.
At the end of the day, here's the bad news. If Verlander and Scherzer and Senga pitch the way they're capable, and Lindor, Alonso, Marte, McNeil, Nimmo, just those 8 guys play the way they're capable, the Mets will be in the playoffs. They're not going to win the World Series. They won't be good enough to beat Atlanta or LA when it comes down to it down the stretch, and probably not San Diego. I think we'll wake up and figure it out. But they'll be a playoff team. And then your bad year will be at least a playoff year, and they'll get a wild card and get you in. If those guys play well enough, the Mets are still better than Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, the Marlins. I don't think the Phillies, to be quite honest. Even then, I think Philadelphia is going to end up because look where they are. And Trey Turner hasn't done anything yet. That's not going to last long. And their staff is way more reliable than right now the Mets have from top to bottom. But all you have to do, if you think about it, to me, it's San Diego, I still believe in LA in the West when it comes down to it. It's going to be probably Milwaukee, but who cares? One team in the Central. And it's going to be Atlanta and let's say Philadelphia. Can the Mets be better than the Marlins by the time the season's over? If those guys play up to capability, yeah. Can they be better than Pittsburgh and Cincinnati? Can they even be better than Arizona the rest of the way, who's played over its skis? If the Mets play to capability, yeah, I think so. That's the hope you have. But it's in the guys who are there. That's it. And guess what? Buck's putting them on the mound, and Buck put the guys I just mentioned in the lineup. If they play well, the Mets will be fine.
Hey, Casey. Do you think the season and the morale just went down the toilet when Diaz got hurt?
I don't know. I don't think it helped, but I can't. I mean, look, what are you worth if your morale is going down the toilet because one guy, no matter who it is, went off the team? And, I sat there and I remember, covering and watching, Adam Wainwright, who at the time was, the ace of the Cardinals, go down before a season, and they're all the way to the World Series, and he's basically a cheerleader the whole year, right? So, the Cleveland Indians at the time, who Michael Brantley was definitely their best player, and he went out for the year, and they didn't have anybody, and they're sitting there all the way in it, and he's a cheerleader in the World Series. Edwin's a big loss. It's your depth is hurt because of that. You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. But how good is this team really? Honestly, how good are these dudes if they just went to the crapper because of that? That can't be an excuse.
Yeah, related comment to that actually, and someone that brought it up to me. So I'm glad Steve brought it up. And that was the loss of Diaz. And the way he put it to me was, you're losing 80 innings of essentially what's like a starter, a frontline starter, right? Pitching 80 innings, and how the trickle down really affected the team. I didn't think of it that way. I thought, well, maybe Robertson could step it up, but because of the lack of depth, that it turned out to be a big effect. Don't you think?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think away your guys in the right seat on the bus, right? So everybody kind of goes down a roll.
Yeah.
But I go back to, and this is where I'll be stubborn, is that why Frankie Lindor hasn't been Lindor? No. Is that why Marte hasn't been good enough? Is why McNeil hasn't been good enough? Is that why Scherzer blew a 5-1 lead against the Yankees? Is that why, we've seen mistakes defensively on the base paths? Why Verlander hasn't been Verlander? Why Carrasco can't get out of a fourth inning? You know what I mean? Like, it's not, yes, all of that. Now, what it does is it makes it harder to close those holes. When a Carrasco isn't good, you now got one less guy, everybody's down, to be able to hit. And look, they miss, you go back to Williams, and they missed a long man. They missed a lot of things, right? If their best players played well, they still would be good enough to be better than Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Miami, and the rest of these teams. I mean, that's, at the end of the day, look, Philadelphia's got nothing from Trey Turner, like zero, right? They have been in a situation where they had Harper gone for how long, lost Hoskins for the year. I mean, Nola hasn't been as good as he should be, and they've had all these issues, and they've still been better than we have been. It's just not enough of an excuse.
Yeah, I agree. And also, we did listen, was Diaz had an all-time season. Was he going to regress a little bit to the norm this season? Maybe. We're all penciling in Diaz for what he was last year. Relievers, they don't always mimic what they were the year before. And Robertson, for the most part, has been unbelievable in the closer's role. Granted, it would shift everything down. Robertson would not, pitch maybe the 8th inning, Otto in the 7th inning. It does change things. But I agree with Casey. Listen, it's a moot point. And here's the other thing. We're 19-2 when our starters go 6 innings. That has nothing to do with Diaz. All right. If Diaz is here, you'd still be 19-2. You're not doing better than that, even with Diaz here. Pitchers need to go 6. It's as simple as that. The Mets, take all the other analytics and light it on fire. That's the only number you need to know. 19-2 when your starter goes 6 innings.
Let's all hope they're better. God willing, they will be. I have to jet because if I don't put my kids to bed soon, they're going to tear my house down. But I had fun.
Casey,
I'm
thank
happy
you
to
so
come.
much for
I'm
doing
happy
this.
to do this. Happy to do this anytime, guys. Just feel
Thank
free.
you.
I love talking baseball.
Awesome.
Anytime.
Thank you,
And
Casey.
not only that,
Anytime.
I mean, when we have, we had Bobby Valentine on last week. Just feel free, come in every week also. We'd love your input here as well. I mean, it's a great community. We're trying to grow it a little bit. We have tons of people watching on Facebook Live. Again, the link is somewhere on Facebook. Come in the room, guys. Don't just be, a voyeur. Come in and participate. Case, always great talking to you and speak to you soon. Thanks so much.
Appreciate you, boys. Stay well. We'll talk again soon.
Got it. Casey Stern, always good talking baseball with him. All right, we got a few minutes. I know everyone wants to go watch the game. Any other thoughts before we go?
I want to throw in. I want to throw in my my awful Met moments, the two that haven't been
good.
discussed. Oral Hershiser shutting out the Mets Game 7 of the NLCS.
Wait, don't say it. Don't say it. I'm gonna say, I know what your other one is gonna be.
Okay, well that was
Mike Scioscia.
Well, I was at that game. I was at that game. It was 14 degrees that night. So yeah, I the whole thing was cumulative. Game 7 was on my 18th birthday. So I had ice cream cake that melted because I couldn't eat it that day. It was awful. But the other one, actually, Terry Pendleton's home run in 1987. They were a game and a half back, and I got a little story about that. Game and a half back. We all know what happened. They were a strike away. Pendleton moves up in the box, hits a sinker from Roger McDowell, hits Ron Darling's car as he's going off to the hospital, and it tied the game for the Cardinals, and they would go off and win. Now, when Pendleton hit that home run, I was sitting in. It was the first year I was in my Tuesday and Friday seats, and I was in section 27 of the mezzanine, row J. The 4 people ahead of me, who I saw every game, were seats 1 to 4. And the guy on seat 4, when Pendleton hit the home run, he took the ball of his hand and he smashed seat 5 so that instead of going to here, it went all the way down to the it went through the hinge and it went all the way down this way, parallel to the seat back. Okay. Now, we came back in 1988 and they never correctly fixed that seat. So every game for about a year and a half, by the 5th inning, the person who would be sitting in seat 5 would all of a sudden fall to the floor because the seat would give way. And the guy who smashed the seat would most of the time be sitting there, and he would go to the person and say, "Oh my God, I don't know how this happened. The seat just keeps going, and I've tried to get him to fix it, but I don't know what happened." Never actually saying that he was the one that broke the seat. So I blame Terry Pendleton for this. And if I ever speak to Terry Pendleton, I'm going to tell him this story and say, "This is what you caused. You caused multiple people to fall in the 5th, 6th inning of every single game since you hit that home run for 2 years."
At the Hall of Fame induction game, they actually had a maintenance guy coming out and fixing somebody's seat. So clearly they have
times have changed.
Interestingly enough, there is a similar situation in Madison Square Garden. Section 3, well, not anymore because they redid it, but for many years, section 331, row C, seat 5, had a huge dent in the back of it. That happened in game 7 of the Stanley Cup semifinals with 7.7 seconds left in the third period when Valerie Zalapukin scored.
Oh, wow.
I punched that seat so hard, there was a huge dent in the seat in front of me where I had season tickets at Madison Square Garden.
Oh, man.
Sal, what is your most painful Met moment?
Oh, mine is easy. It was Beltran.
That's a good one too.
I was in the back section and we did not see Andy's catch. We couldn't see it. The ball was coming to us like, "Oh, here we go, home run." And then we looked up on Diamond Vision and he makes the catch. The whole place erupts. We're erupting all the way through. Beltran gets up, looks at that hook, and everybody just died. Instant silence. And it just, my heart went into my shoes. That was the word. I mean, there's plenty to go around.
There is bad. There is a lot of bad. It is interesting.
It was deafening silence on TV too, other than the groaning in my family room.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, like we've had that debate, and we even contemplating writing, and I think we still should do that article. Greatest, Met postseason catch, and people say Andy Chavez. I said, there's no way you can have a greatest catch in a game that you lost. They just, to me, they're polar opposites. That catch cannot be greater than a Swoboda or Agee's. I think Agee's both catches in that game are huge because the Mets don't win that game. It's a whole different series. But like I think Agee's a 1 and 1A. Then Swoboda. Just for me, I again, it's like listed as one of the greatest moments in Met history. I can't. You lose the game. It's how could it be a great Met moment?
But he allowed them to stay in the game. That doesn't
Only for-
happen.
And everything that happened since then wasn't Endy's fault. I just think
Right.
as a catch, the physicality of that catch and turning the double play the situation that we were at that game. What was it? It was 1-1, I think. So a home run makes it 4-1. Game's over at that point if Endy doesn't make that catch. Now, everything that happened since then, including Beltran and including John Valentin striking out with the bases loaded in the bottom of that inning,
which no one remembers. Right.
Oh, except us lunatics.
Right.
But that none of that is Endy's fault. What Endy did in that moment in a vacuum with that physicality, I think it deserves to be at least in the conversation. Now,
in the conversation,
right? Exactly.
No,
and that's just the way I
listen.
I feel
even in the conversation, postseason plays. I mean, the Sean Green, throwing two batters out. I mean, granted, Kent, ran through the sign and was dead, but the to Paul LaDuca against that was amazing. Getting two outs and that was I think that was in the first inning, if I remember correctly. It's the way that they started that series.
Yeah,
right? I think that was.
I don't
game
remember,
one,
but you might
inning.
be right. Yeah, it was the first game. I know that for sure.
Yeah, and I think it was the first inning. Yeah, it would have to be because Kent would have been up in that first inning, right? So it totally turned the tide. They got two outs on what could have conceivably been two runs. Amazing. That was great. That was crazy. That's one of the craziest Met moments. All right, let's go watch the Met game. I say this every week. Hopefully next week it will be a little better. I think next week's show will probably be Sunday because I think I'm actually going to the Brewer game on Monday, and there's an afternoon game Sunday. It's like a 1:35 game, so I'll probably do a post game. And listen, you know what? I think it was about a month ago, maybe, or 3 weeks ago, when things looked bad. And we had the Rays coming up, and I said, "Listen, this is a time to get hot." Listen, Astros are 4-6 in their last 10. They're not been world beaters right now. You got Max, and you got Verlander. This is it. This is the time. This team, I am, like Casey said, play to the back of their baseball cards. There's no reason why this team cannot go on a 10-game run. All right, and then from that point on, you play 6-4 baseball every 10-game segment. You're there.
Got to do it by July 4th. July 4th is that cutoff. You got to do it by July 4th, and time is running out. And they haven't shown us that I guess they have shown us in small spurts that they can do it, but they need, like you said, they need to rip off something like 7 out of 8, 8 out of 10, 9 out of 12, something like that to get them back at least on the putting green. I know AJ likes his golf references, so that's for AJ. Get him on the putting green, and then by July 4th.
Marte in the 2-hole. Marte's earned it. He's starting to play better. I think the power's going to start coming. He drove the ball a couple of times, just like he's a hair off. I think he gets it going. He'll get some power numbers going. I think Alvarez is feeling more comfortable. He's going to start hitting. I think Buck is probably, when Navarez plays, I think he's going to use Alvarez as a DH. So you're going to have, and Navarez has hit well. He's been in the lineup as well.
Yes.
I don't, I'm just waiting for Tommy Pham to turn into a pumpkin. That's the only,
I knew you would say that.
Just is
never count out a guy who's motivated. That's the thing we know about Tommy Pham. He's motivated.
Yeah,
right.
Clearly
Motivated.
And we're also, and listen, as long as he can stay hot until football season and we don't have to worry about fantasy football, we're fine, right? All right. Like I said, next week is gonna, I feel it. I think this is going to be the week where we finally get some good vibes going. If not, John, we're going to have to revive what we did on the radio, alternate programming suggestions for when the Mets are on TV.
Yes, that was fun.
Yeah,
that was a lot of fun, but we'll be ready.
Painful.
For that
too. All right, guys.
Okay.
Thanks for coming in.
Right.
We'll see
You
you
got
guys
it.
next week. Have a good one,
All right,
everybody.
guys.
Good night. Bye-bye.
All righty.
Bye-bye.